Welcome back to the JNS Media Hub here in Jerusalem. My name is Alex Traiman, CEO of Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org, and I have the privilege of sitting here today with Harley Lippman, foreign policy expert. You've been doing the circuit on media in the Arab world and in China and elsewhere, meeting Israeli leaders, meeting American leaders, and you've come to Israel, I think, at a very incredible time, as we just saw an unbelievable military operation, Rising Lion, where the United States, and then together with the United States, took out the nuclear program of the Iranian Islamic Republic. We are now on the eve, basically, of the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, D.C., where the Prime Minister and President Trump will undoubtedly take a victory lap for what they just did in Iran, but are also talking about potentially ending the war in Gaza, as well as expanding the circle of peace and formulating additional normalization agreements between Israel and other countries in the region, all areas that you and I have spoken about at length in advance of this interview. So welcome here to Jerusalem.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
We were talking a little bit about what has to happen to demonstrate to all parties how conflict must come to an end. What's your take?
Understandably, people are tired of the war in Gaza. And of course, everybody wants it to end. It's hurting Israel's image terribly. It's causing people to hate Israel around the world because they see at night on social media, which is biased, but, innocent Palestinians being pulled out of the rubble in Gaza doesn't make people feel good about Israel and Jews. Now, we understand the context. We didn't ask for this war. Hamas started it. They slaughtered, raped, and committed horrible atrocities, and Israel's just trying to end it, understandably, but it's caused huge problems. So the way wars end and the way conflicts end is one side wins and imposes its will over the other, and the other side concedes and surrenders. The best example is modern history. What were the two most warlike nations in modern history? Nazi Germany and Japan. Yet 80 years after World War II, neither nation has any appetite for war. 4 generations later. Why? Because they were utterly and totally defeated and they surrendered. And that's how you have closure. So ultimately, for people who want peace, even though right now we could celebrate a victory lap, as you just said, it's not enough. And remember, and I'll just say this, there are 3 rules of warfare. Never underestimate your enemy, never hold them in contempt, and never think they can't recover from disaster. So even though Hezbollah is very weak, Iran is weak, they're probably seething with revenge. They could come back in other creative, destructive ways. So Israel has to have a strategy to deal with that as much as possible as a once and for all, where hopefully there'll be regime change.
You think that America and Israel are making strategic mistake if they don't get regime change ultimately in Iran, if they end the Gaza war with a ceasefire?
It's complicated, but yes. And it's also difficult for America and Israel to make regime change because at the end of the day, it is up to the Iranian people. And like America experienced in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam, we can't care more than they do. That's what's behind a lot of the right-wing isolationism, that we have all the burden and that our friends and allies don't either carry or pay their fair share. So it's a critical element.
Well, how does that contradict with the need and the necessity to end the wars as soon as possible, especially in light of all of the bad press and losing the narrative warfare that Israel's been suffering, and America for that matter?
Well, I think Israel has to be given the order to win the war. It looks like, I have a definition. Liberals, not that it's my own, but liberals want Israel to fight with one hand tied behind their back. Mm-hmm. Progressives want Israel to fight with 2 hands tied behind their back. So they need to have the freedom and flexibility to do whatever it takes to finally bring this to a close. And even the Israeli people, where many of them are tired of this war, I think would be more on board with it if they knew that this is going to end it once and for all.
Do you think that the president is holding Prime Minister Netanyahu back from finishing the wars or pushing towards regime change in Iran and especially now in Gaza?
I don't know if he's holding him back because, again, I don't know if Israel could make regime change. Mm-hmm. But certainly working together with the United States has the greatest possibility of that succeeding. And that's what we need, because another thing we've learned out of this, and that is that when people say they're going to kill you, it's
Take them
arrogance
seriously.
to think that you know better what they mean than their own words. Hamas was building these tunnels, billions of dollars going into it. We were asleep at the wheel. What do you think they were going to use those tunnels for? And they said they wanted to destroy Israel. So Israel had fallen into, I don't know the right word for it, but just a
A lull.
lethargy, if you, a lull, an arrogance, feeling that, oh, they fire rockets at us, we fire rockets back. So they just thought that mowing the lawn was the theme. Well, there's many ways to mow the lawn. And you're not being creative and thinking out of the box. You're just going, okay, they fire us, we'll fire back. And you're not thinking that they may have additional strategies that are far more consequential and destructive, like the attack on October 7th. So they have to be able to do something where I think there's something more decisive happens. Again, it's very difficult, particularly with Iran, because you can make the Iranians care more and do something, but it's going to be very difficult because the Iranian regime, like a lot of dictatorships, wants to above all survive. And they have no compunction to mowing down and killing thousands of people in a heartbeat. So it's going to be very difficult. So we could say we want regime change, but actually doing it is going to be very challenging. We need Kermit Roosevelt here again. For those who don't know who it is, he was a CIA agent who overthrew an Iranian ruler called Mossadegh in the 1950s. That was probably a very questionable thing to do.
And
But back in the day, we did overthrow governments.
some people question whether that was really an American coup. I mean, that is you can speak to a lot of Iranians that suggest that that story is a lot deeper, right, than the British and the American involvement there. But that's
correct.
that's
Another
a
story.
that's a show for another time.
That's right.
But I think in some ways, and maybe surprisingly so, this war, which began in Gaza, which then proceeded into Lebanon, which has touched in Yemen, and certainly has climaxed in Iran, is now paving the path for a whole host of normalization agreements between Israel and other countries, including countries that you never thought would be possible, like, for example, Lebanon and Syria, which are now in the conversation. And even in the first Trump administration, when Israel had normalized with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates and Morocco, Sudan, there was talk about the Saudis, but people weren't thinking that there would be this possibility now with Syria or with Lebanon or other countries. What do you expect to see in the coming weeks and months ahead here?
Well, to your point, directly because of this extraordinary military success, probably go down in history as among the most brilliant military success in the annals of mankind. It has greatly impressed the Arab world on multiple levels. A, we all know they respect strength above all. B, it showed an American willingness to not only show courage, as also Israel did, but to go on the offensive and take risk and to be extraordinarily effective. So all this is propelling the Arab world to say, wow, America is a reliable ally and friend, because that was in question. America will go after their enemies. America and Israel will go to win. They're the winning side. We may not love Israel, but we got to give them that acknowledgement that they are militarily a superpower country now, and we got to figure a way to get along with them. And I think Trump is going to offer a mix of carrots and sticks. He's going to give a lot of economic aid and development because he wants to make it happen, regardless of his motives. He wants to make peace happen, and that's amazing. And he should win the Nobel Peace Prize for that, because he's creating peace. What's more noble and better than that in our lifetimes to witness, especially among nations like you just mentioned, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and it may be extended to other nations like Oman, Qatar, Tunisia, even other Muslim, not Arab countries, perhaps like Malaysia and Indonesia.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of countries in the discussion that are taking place. The more they bring to the table, the more it's going to create stability in the Middle East. And more importantly, it's going to transform the region. That's what's really important. Stability could be temporary, but to transform the region, where you pull it out of radical jihadism and bring it more into the orbit of normal nations around the world with normal accountability. And again, they don't have to love Israel, but if they're willing to make peace with Israel, it's going to be extraordinary. Everybody wins. It's a win-win-win. The people who are under Iranian rule, directly or indirectly, like in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, live in terrible poverty. These are failed nations. So freeing them from Iranian imperialism and colonialism, which is what exactly it is. Do you know when the Iranian president died in a helicopter plane crash, they made those nations have the flag being held at half-mast. Think how humiliating that is. It's their president who died, the Iranian president, yet they made other sovereign nations have their flag lowered. I mean, who's ever heard of that? It's a real example of colonialism, and apparently the left has taken advantage of that and seems highly effective, and we have to turn the tables and just tell the truth.
Well, we see that people are accusing Israel, which is a country just about the size of New Jersey, the third smallest state in America, as being the colonial entity, when we're in a region that has been filled with colonialism, Arab colonialism, Iranian colonialism. So we see that Israel's losing the narrative battle, maybe just because of anti-Semitism, but also because all of the concepts are being inverted.
Well, you know what it is? Also, people just don't know basic facts. When I look at the United Nations, I can't think of any nation that was not created through war or force, except for Israel. Israel was created through the legal purchase of land. After the Zionist Conference of 1898, Rothschild bought huge amounts of land legally and helped bring over, I don't remember the number, approximately 20,000 Jews, many of them socialists, who eliminated malaria. And they created vast enterprises and factories, and that became a job magnet in the Arab world. Jews were called Palestinians then. Jerusalem Post was called the Palestinian Post. The Israeli Philharmonic was called the Palestinian Philharmonic. So Jews are the indigenous people. What happened is it created a huge immigration of Jews, and particularly of people in the Arab world, to Israel. So this notion of the Palestinians being indigenous is not correct. Hundreds of thousands. I have quotes from Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt who say, in effect, that the Arab world is swamping the Jewish community in that, we called it the Holy Land, Palestine. They didn't have the word Israel yet, but quotes on that. So, because at that time, people were living in terrible poverty in the Arab world. And in what we now know as Israel, Jewish-owned factories and enterprises were paying much better wages. So whole villages would empty out in Syria, for example. I have an article from the French consul general who was there during the mandate period. So that's a fact that a lot of people don't realize. And then, of course, that there were hundreds of thousands, I think the number is about 800,000 Jews living in the Arab world who had nothing to do with Zionism, had been there for thousands of years and wanted to stay, and were kicked out, couldn't sell their homes, couldn't sell their businesses. Because Israel took them in, no one talks about it. But there should be an issue about that. People talk about Israel being racist, different classes. They're projecting. That's the thing Douglas Murray, I learned from him. He says when people talk about genocide, listen to them. They're accusing Israel of it. They're projecting, which is very powerful. It's like when you look at Hitler, the closest he came to admitting the Holocaust before it occurred in terms of his intentions was a speech at the Reichstag. I think it was in 1938. He said, if Jews bring us into the war, it's not going to create the destruction of Germany. It'll create the destruction of the Jews. So he was projecting onto Jews what he wanted to do, which is to bring Germany and Europe into a war. So we just have to have our facts so we can defend ourselves. Israel's fighting this war and telling the enemy we're going to attack in a day, leave the area. What nation in the history of warfare ever did that? I'm not aware of any. So Israel is trying to act on this war in the most honorable way, and yet at the same time defeat their enemy. Not that Israel is perfect, doesn't make mistakes, and yet Israel is viewed as a genocidal nation that doesn't care about people's human rights, civil rights. And I talk about these things. I'm on the Arab media, I think, partly because people see me as having compassion for Palestinians. I'm on the board of Yale Business School, and for 5 years, I'd pay for a Palestinian student and an Israeli student to go to the business school.
You still have compassion for Palestinian citizens?
I do, but I would still, I do, but I would also be extremely critical of Palestinians. Because when I say on October 7th, when 6,000 people descended across the border to commit savagery and rape and murder, they weren't Bolivians, they weren't Spaniards, they weren't Indonesians, they were Palestinians.
Do you think that there's a process now where Palestinians can make amends and live peacefully?
It's a matter of education, because what also disturbs me about Palestinian society is the lack of compassion that they have. Even during the Holocaust, there were tens of thousands of righteous Gentiles, people who risked their own lives and that of their families to save Jews. Today in Gaza, I'm not aware of any case where there's even one righteous Palestinian Muslim, which means going to Israel, the Israeli forces, or even the Red Cross and saying, hey, there's a Jewish family being held here. The Bibas family was seen walking throughout certain places in Gaza. They have red hair. They're very visible. Everybody saw that. Neighbors hang out the window, mind each other's business. They had to have seen them. Nobody went to the authorities or any authority to say, hey, these poor people have been kidnapped. So they're morally bankrupt. They're a broken society. I have compassion for all people, and I think it's effective for me in advocating for Israel.
They're also victims of their own leadership.
They are victims of their own leadership, but they're also culpable. It's like Germany elected Hitler, Palestinians elected Hamas. So there's a certain culpability and accountability. And it's hard for them, but the hope is that if I were a Palestinian, I'd look around and I'd say, was I glad that billions of dollars was spent on tunnels instead of education and healthcare? I can't imagine if Palestinians would feel good about that. But those are the questions that have to be posed to Palestinians in Gaza.
What do you think about President Trump's proposed plans to try to resettle Gazans outside of the Strip?
I think it's brilliant. One, it's out of the box. It's creative. There may be modifications to it, a work in progress, but at least it's something fresh and new. Nothing else has worked. I know the big criticism is, oh my God, you can't take these people from their homes. I think number one, I think it would be based on voluntary.
A lot of them don't have homes.
There you go. You know what? My response would be, so you would prefer them to live in Gaza where there's barely running water, there's limited sewage, limited electricity. They have nowhere to live since most of the homes are destroyed. And the rubble is filled with booby traps that if children play in it will blow off a leg or an arm. You'd rather have Palestinians live in those circumstances than have a better life somewhere else. That's a kind of racism against Palestinians, right? And so you have to show that hypocrisy, and that's how you show anti-Semitism. They think Jews are just sensitive to criticism. So you have to point out that if you have one standard for Israel and a different standard for everyone else, that's unfair. That's anti-Semitism. You have to calmly explain it. Jews get very emotional, and they often don't know how to explain to people who may be anti-Semitic unconsciously because of the way they're being unfair in comparing Israel, saying that there's genocide. Genocide is what happened in Rwanda when over 1 million Tutsi were murdered by the Hutu in about a month. Genocide is what happened to Armenians, where it was over 1.5 million people starved to death. That's genocide.
Yeah, but
it's not genocide when 98% of the population in Gaza that was alive on October 7th is still alive today. That's not genocide.
But if Gazans get resettled elsewhere, then the accusations against Israel is just going to shift from genocide to what they're going to say was the actual goal of Israel from the very beginning, which is ethnic cleansing.
Well, Israel has to, there's always unintended trade-offs, if you will, intended or unintended in life. That's just the nature of things. And Israel you're right, that Israel will be open to that. It all depends how it's done. Depends on what conditions these people go into. As long as it really is to better their lives, I think that has to be shown. It has to be communicated. But at the end of the day, the message has to be to the world at large, and particularly the Arab world, that there are consequences to slaughtering Jews on the scale of a near Holocaust. And the consequences are utter devastation. And when they see that, I think that's going to be a deterrent to not only Jewish survival, for Jews to survive, but other minorities, that if you slaughter people, that there are horrific consequences to that, and make future Hamas attacks or future believers in committing savagery and terrible rapes and torture, that those people realize that it didn't work. They didn't get what they wanted out of it.
Well, Israel's been the major benefit of support from President Trump in terms of weapons, in terms of the green light, in terms of diplomatic backing. Um, and I think perhaps it's an isolated window of time in which Israel can depend on such firm support from American president. Do you think that Israel should depend on the ongoing support from the White House that they're receiving from President Trump now?
Israel right now has an extraordinary friend in the White House, arguably, without exaggeration, the best friend Israel's ever had and may ever have. And Israel has to be smart. Israel suffered terribly by not being proactive and being prepared. Israel put its head in the sand and, was in denial. So you can't depend on anyone, because you could have a Democratic progressive who's elected in 3.5 years who will cut aid to Israel. So I can't tell the prime minister what to do, but if I were prime minister of Israel, I'd do everything possible to make sure that Israel is self-sufficient, because as Jews learn, they really can't count on anyone else. Right now, America has been an extraordinary friend, and Israel is very grateful for that. But you can't count on that. And that would be a very dangerous thing to do. It's like Europe with NATO. They were counting on America to save them, and they weren't paying their fair share. And then Trump said, well, then maybe America won't be part of NATO. And it scared NATO, where they should pony up. It's like I said earlier, you can't care more than they do. This is what motivates a lot of the isolationists that say, we don't want to be caught in some quagmire because we're there to try to nation build and make this country that they've freed or invaded into a self-sustaining modern country that's going to do well if the people are not on board.
Harley Lippman, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.